So I've recently started watching some of the old classic Universal monster movies from the 1930s and so on. I'm not a big fan of horror necessarily as a genre, and most of the films I review on this channel are going to be from the 1930s to 50s in that time frame. And that's one of the things I've really come to appreciate about these older films is there are some really good old classic horror films that manage to be creepy and tell a good story with good acting without necessarily having a ton of gore and grisly, bloody yuckiness. And I'm going to start with one of the first classics of this particular genre, which would be the 1931 classic Dracula, starring Bella Lugosi. And this is a beautifully filmed, beautifully acted film. It's done in this just creepy black and white. And you watch Bela Lugosi. He's got the pale complexion, the jet black cape, and it just looks fantastic in black and white, especially when they show his face kind of staring at the camera with the light glowing on his eyes. There's a lot of artistry to this film. And it's also noteworthy, too, as I was watching this, you notice the absence of music. Yes, there's a little bit of Tchaikovsky music during the opening credits, and that's pretty much it. There's a brief scene where they're at a concert in London, and you hear some concert music. But otherwise, this film is just the audio of the dialogue, and that's it. So you're watching a scene where, say, Dracula's brides come creeping up on Renfield, and there's no music to go with it. And normally you would watch a film like that today, and there would be maybe the creepy passage of the strings to kind of build the suspense. Well, there's none of that here, and it's amazing how well that actually works. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still a huge fan of film music. I mean, I can ramble on and on about John Williams for hours, but in a strange way, this film works almost, I would say, better without the music. Because then you're really focused on the scene and what's unfolding in this just beautiful, lush black and white. It's also noteworthy, some of the sets in this film, they look so good. The castle interior, there's a sequence where the characters are going up a staircase at one point, and it just looks amazing. Bela Lugosi, of course, is the star of this film and just carries the role perfectly. He is the strength of this film, and you just can't take your eyes off him. I mean, he's amazing. You know, his creepy accent when he's talking to characters that he meets in London, it's great stuff. And also noteworthy, I thought, was the character who played Renfield. The actor's name was Dwight Fry, and he does this amazing transformative role where he starts the film as just this, normal character who's in his right mind, traveling to Transylvania on like a business matter. Everybody in the village is like scared to death of going to, Dracula's castle, but Renfield doesn't seem to have a problem with it. So he meets with Dracula to talk about a business dealing. And, he's got no idea, of course, that Dracula is a vampire. I mean, we all sort of know that going into this. And while he's staying there, there's a little bit of a business dialogue, but eventually Dracula hypnotizes Renfield and takes a bite of him and turns him into a raving lunatic. So Dracula makes the trip, overseas in his coffin in this boat with Renfield, and the boat eventually gets back to England, but Renfield is like the only living person on the boat. And there's this crazy, creepy scene where you see him just kind of coming out of the lower decks, staring right at the camera, and some great stuff. Because again, we're seeing all of this stuff happen without any real gore or blood shown on screen. It's all just implied. And it leaves so much for just the imagination to kind of connect the dots of, well, what just happened? We don't really see in detail Dracula biting into necks, but we know that it has happened. So we're in London, and then we're at this theater, and Dracula meets Dr. Seward of the sanitarium where Renfield is now going to be living. He also meets Mina and her fiance, John Harker, and a friend of theirs, Lucy Weston. And, of course, it's bad news. You don't get to know Dracula because he's going to sneak in at night and, drink your blood. So we get back to Renfield. He is in this mental home and he's eating flies and spiders. And the guy playing this actor is crazy good at playing a creepy lunatic. And you just got to watch it for his performance as well. I think he really carries his weight well in this film. Van Helsing shows up as the character, and he kind of knows what's going on. He hears the wolf howling, and he figures out he needs to carry some wolf's bane around to protect from vampires, and he's kind of the Fox Mulder, I guess, of that day. And Dracula eventually comes to visit Mina and takes a bite out of her, so she starts to have some crazy transformation that goes on in the film as well. So I won't go too much more into the story beyond this point because it's an old classic. You really need to see how the events unfold. But Van Helsing knows what's going on. He knows how to take care of a vampire. So ultimately, the big showdown is going to be between the two of them, Van Helsing and Dracula. So it's a great film. And this, I think, was, to me, an excellent introduction to the Universal Monster series. I want to do some reviews of, like, The Wolfman and Frankenstein. And I know ideally I should be doing this in like October, so maybe I'm starting a little bit early. But, these are some great classic films. And again, they're accomplished well, even without film music. Somehow it's just that beautiful black and white, and the acting and the creepiness of the scenes is enough to really build the suspense and the drama. And Bella Lugosi, is just perfect in this film. So that's the original Dracula from 1931. Probably not going to be reviewing much horror in terms of more modern, because, with the exception of maybe some suspenseful films like A Quiet Place. I enjoyed that, and that was a fairly recent film. And it didn't really rely on a lot of gore necessarily, but all the same, I realize there's still a wealth of old films from the past I need to keep exploring. So I'm going to keep it to the 1930s through 50s, I think, for now. So expect more of these black and white monster movie reviews in the near future.